10 minutes, part 2. Immediately, I felt the Lord wanted me to tell one of the guys who'd come to this church with us from our church. It was my pastor, the associate pastor, me, and this young man who I barely knew. And it was something about him being a worship leader, which was kind of odd because he was almost completely deaf. He had cochlear ear things, and he had been that way since birth, so his speech was problematic. And of course I was like, I'm not doing that. I'm not telling him that. But I just felt an insistence. So I did it. And I said, hey man, and the exact words I don't remember, but something about it's gonna come. And I mean, it was obviously what he'd been praying. I mean, he literally collapsed in tears and sort of fell out, and like, I'm like, danger, Will Robinson, you know, like, oh my gosh. And that was the beginning of this adventure. We got back in the car, and I didn't shut up for the hour and 15 minutes, and I just was like, and like after 45 minutes of telling her, I'm like, how come nobody's, what are y'all doing? Like nobody's excited. Nobody's flummoxed or flabbergasted, you know? And I'm like, dude, you've been baptized in the Holy Spirit. And I was like, huh? They're like, yeah, dude, like the Bible, the story. I was like, yeah. And I was like, okay, whatever. And I just went back to telling the story and the amazing feeling, and the miracles began like, pew, like a sky rockets in flight. It was unbelievable. Very, very quickly, like in a matter of a couple of days, I'm with the pastor, Pastor Steve Bishop. At the time, it was Second Baptist of Woodstock of Chester, South Carolina. They changed it later to, I think, Freedom Ministries or Freedom Church, I think. And he said, hey, we're going to drive by the Chester county's got 5,000 people in it, or did. You know, so the hospital's like an elementary school or smaller. And they didn't have a hospice wing, but they had the kind of the end there, you know, the ICU, and then a few rooms where the people were gonna be at the end. And he said, his last name was Wade, he's had his third heart attack, and they said, this is the one, and we're gonna go by and say goodbye. And as soon as he said that, I knew the man a little. Maybe I'd had kind of like maybe one-on-one conversation, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I knew his son a little bit better. But I mean, we weren't buddies or friends or anything. I just, you know, we knew each other. Because I hadn't been at this church very long. And I just, when Pastor Steve said that, I just felt like, no, it's not his time. And so we get to the hospital, I don't know, 20 minutes drive maybe, because we had been out of town doing something. Because it doesn't take 20 minutes to get around this town. We get to the ICU, and it's like the end. Like, it's all the way packed, and we're like at the door. You can't even get into the room, and his heart's going boop, boop. Maybe 4 children, bunch of grandchildren, some friends, and his wife, who I don't think I'd met at the time, is at his side and says something like, we've all said goodbye and we love you, and it's okay. Like literally, like that was the moment. And kind of people looked up at the monitor, and it was like boom, boom. It was that slow. And I said, hey, I don't know, I just feel like it's not really his time. Would y'all mind if I pray? And this was the look I got. Yeah, okay. They said okay, a couple of people said, but nobody moved. Like, the people in front of me, they didn't even move. And so I was like, okay. And so I literally kind of, you know, oh, excuse me. And I looked through, and the people parted a little bit, and I could see the man's big toe up under the sheet. That's where I was, right at the foot of the bed. But I knew, it was like, when I saw his big toe, that was like the miracle. I was like, it's over. And I remember reaching out my hand, and I went, chink, and the Holy Spirit was like, kaboom! Like instantly. And I don't think I prayed very long at all, like a minute at the most. And I don't know what I said, but I was aware after a moment that I was hearing boop, boop, boop. And I let go, and I looked up, right up there, and the heart monitor was beating like a 28-year-old. Boom, boom, boom. And I brought my head down to see, and no one was looking at the guy who was just about to be dead, who had been about dead 30 seconds ago. No one was looking at the monitor. Everybody was looking at moi. I mean, they were just like, and one of the great little tiny moments, I looked like this, because I was still kind of leaning forward. Pastor Steve was standing there, and he went, okay, all right, let's go. And he grabbed me by the arm, and we went out and left it. And man, we got in the car. Oh my God, we giggled. We laughed, and we were just, it was so amazing. It was beautiful. 6.5 minutes. I got 5 minutes left. Four minutes left. So not the next day, but real close. In the same church, there was a very old black man. I believe his name was John. This is 13 years ago. And he was a child or a grandchild of slaves. There was no education. He was a self-professed wild man. I didn't know this part yet. Just living, a sinful life. But he'd had a stroke 20 years before, so bad that, like, the skin, this eye had died, and the skin just had drooped down, so all you could see was this eye, and this eye had now become just completely white. But they weren't going to operate on him. He wouldn't have lived through the surgery, and body was collapsing. And but he had been tiny bit better, and I had met him. He stayed at the little old folks thing, and I was like, hey, who's going to take the old people food? And they're like, hey, Fritz, he's not. So I got drafted, so I was taking food to them twice a week, I think, giving goods, and so I had seen him a few times and chatted with him, and so the pastor says, I think his name was John. John is in the final time. He's back at the hospital. So we went to see him, and it was a 2 or 3 person room, but he was the only one in there. And I sat by the door because the odor was kind of strong. And Steve and he sat close together. Steve sat near the bed, and John was able to sit up, and he kind of gave a life review to Steve. Now, he knew I was there, and he had recognized my voice. And said how he'd been, never knew his dad, and the kind of life, and maybe I don't know, 15 children over various women raised, and then at 60, let's say, he'd found God and was able to experience a love of a woman, a real relationship, have a couple of children, raise them, be a real dad, and how thankful, incredibly thankful he was for that. And it was probably at least a 15 or 20 minute speech, although speech it was difficult for him to speak, but we had been around him enough. I didn't say a word. Steve every once in a while, nodded and said something to let him know he was paying attention, and which of course we were. And then this man says, I just wish I could get up out of this bed one more time and go down this hallway and tell everybody, you know, because everybody on this hallway is about to be gone, tell people about Jesus. And he looked over at me, and I didn't know why, he didn't know why, but we both knew something was about to happen. And I stood up and I walked over to the bed. I got to talk faster. And as I got there, he held out his hands. I put my hands in his hands, and he lifted up my hands upon his eye, and I began to pray. And then for the first time in my life, gobbledygook started coming out of my mouth. I was praying in tongues. And I felt like we were in a little energy vortex, slowly turning like a merry-go-round. It was peace. It wasn't love. It wasn't excitement like when I had been on the ceiling. It was just peace. And then it ended, and I looked down at him because he was sitting on the bed. And as I looked at him, this eye that was completely like a white sheet, like smoke blown by a wind, it just cleared, boom. And he could see me. And he smiled, and he reached over and grabbed his walker, and I said, "You want me to help me?" It took him 3 or 4 minutes to get to the hall door. And just as he went to step out the hall, he leaned backwards to look at us, and he winked his eye, and then he stepped one more step into the hall so we couldn't see him, and he said, "All right, everybody, I'm here to tell you about Jesus." And by this time, Steve and I I'm not sure why the emotion was different. We just cried. We got it in the car and cried, and then prayed that we would never have hardened hearts to be tired of it.